Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to you all. We'll begin this morning's book launch and our other discussions with the traditional welcome to country. The formal words I'll use this morning have been endorsed by the United Unbreakable Elders Council. So I'll do it in the name of all of us. We wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, the Ngunnawal people. We wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and this region. We'd also like to acknowledge and welcome other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are attending today's event. And it's quite exciting that we're a small gathering here. Besides Senator Pat Dodson, who launched the book, I'd like to welcome also Senator Mullen McCarthy, who's here in attendance.
The Senator, as you all know, from the Northern Territory, and another participant, of course, will be Warren Snowden. We have an apology from the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Ken Wyatt. He would like to have been here but can't make it. So, it's fascinating. I was just saying to Paul Costigan that I hadn't seen Michael Bowden myself for at least 50 years, and he made contact with me about 2 or 3 years ago. I think he'd read some of the stuff I've been writing on politics and had a couple of viewpoints, which I must say I mostly agreed with. But what had slipped me by was that Michael had in intervening times become very much an anthropologist and a theologian, and in many ways, I think, in many ways, a mystic. But it's a mystic in terms of the respect and the discovery he made for mystery via the experience of the first Australians he was working with in the Northern Territory. So I was really honoured to be asked to come and be part of this book launch and this commemoration of Michael. And that reminds me, there is a warning to First Australians that we do have images of people who have passed away, being displayed here today. And of course, the central image is Michael J. Bowden himself. So now I will ask the publisher of Alella Books, the publisher of this book, Unbreakable Rock, Professor Michael Pera, to join us and have his say. Michael.
Order. Greetings. What's up? Welcome on this NAIDOC week. I'm in the Jarralane Hills in central Gippsland, Gurnai country, and I pay respects to the elders past and present for carrying this land over countless generations. 12 months ago, I was in Cambodia as a business volunteer to Northern University and DCD, Developing Cambodia by Degrees, an open e-learning institute for Khmer architecture, engineering, open and e-learning. A last-minute change of plans sent me to Darwin. I came home via Darwin. At 4 a.m. I was met by Mike Bowden, a huge frame of a man, devastated by motor neuron disease, but talking to me via his iPad. We drove to Darwin's harbour overlooking Bathurst. He told me of his thesis, of the doctoral thesis of the Alchira Dreaming and the Cosmic Christ, and the rejection slips that he had received from publishers. I said, "Would you like Alella Books to publish?" "What's Alella Books?" he said. Alella is a Catalonian village in the north of Barcelona. My great-grandfather, Pablo Pera, was the flour miller there,
and his 12 surviving children and cousins all emigrated to Melbourne between 1850 and 1890. Mike's face gave the reply, yes. We agreed to publish while he was still on the twig, and I warned him of the enormous effort. Magella tells the story evocatively in the book. Corpus Christi guys, family and friends got on board. In precisely 9 months, the completed books arrived in David Horgan's Lake Press warehouse in Hawthorne. Mike was not there to see it. Like any newborn child, I, as a publisher, held it lovingly. I looked at it, the readability, the index, the dictionary, the photos. I was so pleased with it. It was a wonderful production. And in all births, there are many midwives. I would like to give thanks to the editors, Magella and Laurie, to the designers, to Sarah and Ben, to copy editors, Mick and Terry, and the photo enhancer, Alan. As poet Jared Manley Hopkins tried to capture the windhover, the eagle, in words in his poem, we had sought to capture the vision of Mike Bowden between covers. Mike had worked with the Arunda elders to capture their Algera mystery, especially the great cover artist Teresa Ryder and the elder M.K. Turner. And with many in their community, their classrooms and footy teams. Mike was never identified by his 1969 Tiger Premiership win. Mike sought to understand the mysteries of the dreaming, as Kev Sheedy put it, dream time at the G. For Mike, Algera is the gift of the First Nation people to us latecomers. Mike was a lifelong teacher, informed by Geoffrey Blaney's The Triumph of the Nomads and by Gerard Manley Hopkins' Windhover, which was recited by his eldest son, Sean, at his funeral. Mike quoted the poem in Byways, the book that we put together, and he gave the story of his 2 years at Corpus Christi training to be as a priest. He chose a different highway. The Windhover captured so much of Mike's spirit. Let me share some of it with you. Let's think of Mike. There's a Catalan saying that to talk of a deceased is to bring them back to life. I see Mike in this. I caught this morning's minion, kingdom of daylight's dolphin, dappled dawn-drawn falcon in his riding of the rolling level underneath him steady air, and striding high there. How he rung upon the rein of a wimpling wind in his ecstasy, then off forth on swing as a skate's heel sweeps smooth on the bow bend, the hurl and guiding rebuffed by the big wind. My heart in hiding stirred for the bird, the achiever of the mastery of the thing. Brute beauty and valour and act, O air pride plume, here buckle, and the fire that breaks from thee, a billion times told lovelier, more dangerous, O my chevalier. Mike follows that chevalier. For him, the chevalier was the Jesus of the gospel. He immersed himself not only in that, but in the languages of our First Nation people. The book introduces us to the language of Arunda, a tough fascinating read to grasp the richness, the complexity, the importance of Indigenous languages, a love he passed to his only daughter, Magella, among 6 sons, including fostered Charlie. It's my dream that this book will be part of the educational fabric for our whitefella kids to understand this land they cared for over 1,600 generations. Alela Books has been the midwife to Mike's vision. Mike and I agreed that this was not to be a money-making venture, but an ideological adventure to give the whitefellas a glimpse of our blackfella Alchira mystery. May I urge that you get a copy. Share it as a Christmas gift with your family and friends. Put it in their hands so the message may get into their minds. Go to your local bookshop, or in these COVID days, buy it online direct from alelabooks.com. In this book, we truly grasp the culture of the land, the way of life and language of our Indigenous mobs. It also tells of enculturation, the clash of cultures that Pat Dodson met as parish priest, and its remarkable consequences for him to be our father of reconciliation. Paddy and I have 2 things in common. We were both Catholic priests in the first decades of our working life. He in Darwin, I in Melbourne. Secondly, Paddy was welcomed to my Aunt Marion's Gartland sheep station at Coolamet West in Tarryukin. During long weekends and school holidays from Monterey College in his middle. Buddy and Chris Gartland, his 2 surviving surrogate siblings from the Gartlands, are now watching this book launch from Portland and from Deniliquin. Alela Books has been the midwife to Mike's vision. We're proud of that. Please get copies at this launch or at alelabooks.com and imbibe its message. And thank you, Senator Paddy, for doing us the honour of launching Mike Bowden's book. And now I hand you back to our MC, Paul Bongiorno.
Thank you, Michael. And what a small world it is. Well, it's, I'd also like to welcome Rick Goffin, the other MP for the Melbourne Church, just joined us.
And it's my great honour to introduce the Father of Reconciliation, and in fact the Shadow Minister of Reconciliation, Pat Dodson.
What up? There are the people. I pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land where I am this morning, none of our people. And I pay my respects to the Aranda people of Central Australia, without whose boundless knowledge and goodwill this book we launch today would not have been possible. We are here today to celebrate the remarkable life and writings of Michael Bowden, whose death in April we were prevented from properly marking because of the early days of the COVID outbreak and its causes of lockdown. I extend my condolences and best wishes to Mike's family. To them I say that I am honoured to have been invited to launch this book. Mike would be pleased that the launch is happening in NAIDOC week. And it's most fitting that in the context of this launch, that the theme of this year's NAIDOC week is always was, always will be, a bit like the unbreakable rock. Because the wisdom revealed in the book is rooted in the Arana-rich tradition of Algeria, the creation of the world, all the things in it, and its external existence. A week ago, I was out on country in my home state of Western Australia, in my role as a member of the Parliament's Joint Standing Committee on Northern Australia. Warren Snowden, in fact, was with me. And we're inquiring into the destruction of those 46,000-year-old caves in the Juukan Gorge. We were able to see for ourselves the scale of the physical destruction, and we witnessed the continuing expression of the Puntu Kundi Kumara Pinakura people, of their connection to that place and to the spirits that still co-inhabit it. We're able to hear firsthand from the traditional owners about how the loss of such priceless heritage has caused them so much grief and sorrow. Mike Bowden would have understood the grief of those people. But he also knew that the grief was not a terminus, but also a time of rededication and commitment to belief in Algeria. He's a man who, during a bicycle ride out to Simpson's Gap 2 years before his death, when he was just coming to terms with the dreadful prognosis of the disease which his life would be taken far too soon, and he wept at the sight of a white gum tree destroyed by fire. In the final chapter of his book, written in the final weeks of his life, Mike invites us to respond to the bushfires earlier this year from the perspective of what he's identified as Algeria Catholicism. He reminds us that the Arana people make no clear separation between the secular and the sacred, the ontological and the existential morph into a new space into which one can coexist in its beliefs. Everything animal, everything innate is sacred. He quotes his friend, Margaret Mary Turner. She says, "There's a lot of sacredness in our homelands, in our country. Not sacred sites everywhere, but sacredness in the land everywhere. The land itself is sacred to us." He calls for a ritual of recovery so that we can reconcile with the bush we have abused. Here's a chance, he writes, for all of those commercial operators who have exploited the bush and the land, extracted the water and the minerals, run off with the wealth and left this country to suffer, to unite in humility with a suffering nation and the burning bush to make good. I think of the devastated country that I surveyed last week in the Pilbara. And I think of Mike Bowden's heartfelt writings about how we can achieve a sense of calm and repair in a wasted world. Redemption would appear to challenge us to achieve this. His fundamental optimism and generosity shine through the pages of the book. I must admit, I first approached the book with a sense of trepidation. I apprehended wrongly that it may be a dense theological tract, confirming Catholic dogma and teaching over that of the Arana. But once I embarked upon it, I found it was more a search for meaning through a dialogical manner, and I became interested. There was the admission of destruction forced upon the Arana by colonial beliefs and practices, and keen observation by Michael about the impacts of Arana beliefs, practices, leading to a realisation of their resilience. And there was the gnawing of Catholicism in the form of its missiology to proselytise and subjugate the Arana to a Western vision of its own multiple manifestation of Christianity. This book, even though much of it is distilled from Mike's PhD thesis, is engaging and accessible. It's the work of a good man, a well-read man, with an open and inquiring mind and an accommodating disposition. Through his work and friendships, Mike Bowden clearly won the confidence of the Aboriginal people in Central Australia, especially his precious circle of Arana women, some of whom I understand are tuned in today from Alice Springs. Mike has plumbed the reaches of their traditional spiritual beliefs and related that knowledge to their unique accommodation and practice of Catholicism. An understanding of the fusion of belief systems that the book explores is possible to contemplate only because of the thoroughness and generosity of Mike's network of trusting Arana friends, guiding us as they did Mike. He could question and find explanations found in a legitimate but different educational framework and set of principles. Answers or explanations coming from a different culture and social context from that of the Western common interpretations. This made learning intelligible through the Arana teaching and teachers. What strikes me most about this book is the obvious willingness of those women to reveal and share their knowledge, and that Mike has listened to them with a deep understanding and an openness to be taught and to learn, not just to rearrange the biases in a pretense at learning. It helps, of course, that he knew the Arana language, and that in itself is a great achievement. A legitimate transformation into the world of values of others when language becomes the vehicle to dialogue within. But it's Mike's obvious readiness to listen and change which underpins the authenticity of this book. It seems like some type of metanoia experience is happening when is even undertaking the most mundane of chores, like driving kids to school. True listening is an art, a state of mind, a state of being even. It's the foundation of being able to understand each other. When we begin to understand that connectivity is the basis of our being and fundamental to our salvation. When we realise this is necessary between humans, creation and the Creator, and the need for mutual fulfilment through respect and love, we begin to experience what transcendentalism must be about. Too often, listening is cursory and superficial, and I'm always a bit sceptical when government agencies put it about that they are carefully consulting with First Nations peoples. Most times, in my experience, the consultation is one-way traffic. First Nations peoples are told what is going to happen. Most often, what's going to happen to them. And that's called consultation. And where the listening, you often ask, where is the listening and the transformative learning that should take place when there's true dialogue between peoples? The Uluru Statement from the Heart, Voice, Treaty, Truth, will challenge us to look in this direction if justice is to be done. The transformative capacity of our own intellects to relearn and re-understand many of the suppositions we've grown up with, and even some of the truths that we've been taught. There's a good example of that syndrome of consultation without listening happening right now, with the government's determination to impose the cashless debit card in the Northern Territory as a permanent replacement for the basics card. The basics card and the income management that goes with it were meant to expire at the end of next year. Now the government says it's consulted with Aboriginal people in the Northern Territory about foisting the cashless debit card on them. But that's not the message I got last year when a deputation of Aboriginal people from Central Australia visited me in Canberra. They said there's been no consultation and the government wasn't listening to them. They wanted the government to listen to their pleas and get out of their lives. Even accepting the government's assertion about consultation, they clearly haven't listened, as Mike Bowden has listened. He makes whatever passes as consultation by government over fundamental policy look very shallow indeed. The beautiful thing about the book is not only Mike's readiness to give a voice to the Aranda people and set a pathway for the reader to understand and develop insights into their beliefs without making compatibility with much newer beliefs too difficult. He comes from the Aranda perspective to the Catholic perspective, rather than go from the Catholic to the Aranda, which is quite a feat in itself. And I enjoyed his interpretation of the new stained glass windows of the old church in Alice Springs. I especially appreciated how Mike had deconstructed the Lord's Prayer. For instance, the phrase, "forgive us our sins," is rendered in Aranda as, "walk with us in our troubles." Quite a different concept. I wish that that this book had been able to be accessed, and more of this sort of knowledge, certainly when I landed in Alice Springs in the early 1980s, when the church was far less open to the sort of progressive and inclusive ideas that Mike expands in his book. He records that Aranda and the non-Indigenous Catholics can be rightly proud of the traditions that segregation to integration over the 90 years of history of the church in Alice Springs, their efforts at grappling with that. I champion his vision that the church should recognise Aranda sovereignty by handing back the land it owns in Alice Springs and leasing or seeking a lease back of that land from its traditional owners. Alas, I fear that bold course might be a step too far for the church and its non-Indigenous congregation. Yet, in an age of native title and the acknowledgement of the lie of terra nullius, the church needs to take stock not only of the challenging legal landscape and its changing nature, but to practice its faith and put its faith in God's mercy. Because that's what you ask others to do when you're trying to proselytise them to your belief systems. Some years ago, I'd even suggested a similar proposition to the hierarchy in relation to its assets at Wadair and Daly River. But no such risk-taking happened back then. I'd suggest as why shouldn't the church live its belief and be at the mercy of the traditional owners and their authority for them to stay on their lands, as they ask those traditional owners to place their trust in the mercy of God and his salvation. For the church to occupy traditionally owned land leaves it vulnerable to the authority of the traditional owners and subject to their permission to remain. But even if Mike Bowden's book doesn't open hearts to such magnanimity, at least he would have opened the eyes to an evolving and exciting new dimension of Catholicism in the centre. I commend this book, and I commend also the hard-working team led by Michael Perra, who's already mentioned our common connection through the Garton family. And I was saying to his son earlier how I'd been down at the grandparents' residence in Melbourne many years ago as a schoolboy and meeting a man I called Uncle Peter and Auntie Jean, who were Mr. Garton's sister. So the nexus has brought us all the way to the launching of this book, which is a fantastic thing. This book is a truly significant contribution to the theology of people like Teilhard de Chardin and those who believe in the truth of a cosmic Christ and celebrate his message of the good news. And for those who believe that the revelation of the glory of God is man fully alive, connected in being to creation, and those who acknowledge a loving God requiring salvation to be a reconciliation of mankind to mankind, mankind with creation and mankind with the Creator. I now have the great privilege and great honour of launching Unbreakable Rock. Please read it.
Thank you so much, Pat. That launch was as profound as the book. I now invite Warren Snowden, a friend of the Bowden family and of Michael. He, of course, is a member for Lingiari, and Alice Springs, his home country.
Thank you, Paul. Can I acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri traditional owners of this wonderful part of the world, my birthplace. Can I acknowledge the Central Aranda, the traditional owners of the Mbandawa country in Alice Springs, and particularly those who were Mike's informants in this book, this great endeavour. Can I thank Pat for his eloquent, very eloquent launch of this book. And if you'll forgive me, I'd like to acknowledge another person in this room who's been a mentor of mine for my whole adult life, Bishop Patrick Power. Welcome, Pat. I'm not sure how I can give Mike's life justice. What we know, and if you look at this book and read about Mike's life's journey, it seems to me inevitable we would land at this place. I know that this morning we've got Pitjantjatjara, Yangatjatjara, traditional owners of Pukaja, Ernabella, listening in, and I understand we'll hear from those people at some later point. I want to, at the outset though, just acknowledge Mike's love for family. To witness the Bowden family, and most particularly, Mike's endearing love and admiration and partnership with his wife, Judy, is just a privilege. Just a privilege. His absolute devotion to his family, to his children, and to their children was remarkable. Not unique, but at the same time remarkable. And I know I can speak on behalf of Mike's many friends, his extended family in Central Australia who knew him well. I think particularly of Bill and Ann Davis. And I'm not sure if they're watching this broadcast, but I know with me they would see the life of the Bowden family in Central Australia as adding a great deal to our lives and to the life of our community. And we see in the production of this great book the inevitable journey that Mike was on. He was forever a teacher, quite clearly forever a teacher. He died a teacher. But he was also a great believer in community and in his church. And he was able to combine the love of community, a love of church, with an immersion and love of Aranda culture. And that's epitomised in the production of this wonderful work. Now as you go through life, and I was reminded this morning that I'm a little older than I thought I might have been, and as you go through life, you come across people who have a remarkable influence on you, directly or indirectly. And Mike, when I reflect, had a remarkable influence not only on my life, but on the lives of so many. And that's forever chronicled now in this wonderful book. And it's something for all of us to learn from. And we should feel happy about learning from it. And be happy about life as it turned out for Mike. Because it was truly productive. And it was his love of family, his love of community, his love of church, which allowed him to produce this wonderful piece of work. So when I think of how we might see into the future Mike's lessons, his legacy is this book. And as his publisher has said, it's an opportunity for all of us, to learn from it. And for the future, as Patrick said, it would have been remarkable to have had this book when we, well, certainly Pat, and certainly Mike, from my own point of view myself, when I first started work in Central Australia. To be able to learn from something which is so informed, so articulate, so well written, that you're able to imbibe what comes from it. And in doing so, change my attitudes. And I think there is a lesson here for the broader community, which Pat alluded to in his contribution, around where we sit in this nation, about our obligations for and with our First Nations people, and to understand that listening is more than just having an ear. Listening is also learning. Once you learn, you pick up the information that you're required to pick up, you then act in a spirit where the ownership of the action belongs to the people you've listened to. Sadly and frustratingly, that's not what we're getting from the current government. And it hasn't been what we've had from previous governments, to be fair. Mike left us a great legacy. It's in the book, it's in his family. And can I particularly pay my respects and honour the work that Magella has done. A remarkable young woman in her own right. Someone we can all learn from, as with the rest of the family, who I have so much respect for. I do thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning and to share this podium. I do encourage anyone who's not read it to purchase it and read it. But most importantly, learn the lesson of life that Mike's given us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Warren. And we now have the privilege of hearing from a member of the Bowden family, Kane Bowden, and hopefully he's going to be zoomed into us from Ernabella.
Thanks, Paul. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge how fitting it is that it's NAIDOC week and that I'm on Unbreakable Pitjantjatjara Yunkajarra land here in Central Australia. I pay respects to the traditional owners here and all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in this country. Thanks, Warren. That was humbling. I know you shared in our grief when we lost Dad earlier in the year and had tremendous respect for him, evident in your words today. Thanks for acknowledging the Davis mob too. I'll be with them tonight and we can reflect on all the people you mentioned that Dad impacted. And Pat, yours were special words and will be cherished by the family. I think Bowdens might be making a habit of co-opting you to speak at special events, Pat. Just last year, I believe you spoke at O'Loughlin College in Darwin, where Rhett, our brother, is the principal. Rhett tells me that it was a wonderful address to the students and also that your nephews are both emerging leaders there. Pat, you were right in saying that Dad was trusted by the Artunda people and that he understood true listening to obtain deep understanding, evident in his book. You might be interested to know that Dad had an annotated copy of your book, Paddy's Road, Pat. He saw you as a determined and decent hero of Aboriginal people. He admired you deeply, Pat. So our thanks again for what you've done to launch his book today and give it the profile it deserves. We also want to thank a few others very quickly. Firstly, Mike Pera, for his tireless work to bring this book to life. Your energy, Mike, has seen this project through and we thank you for it. Laurie Maloney's also been a big part of this project and we thank you, Laurie, for everything you've done. Playing your part was critical to getting Dad's ideas out of the PhD format and into something that every Australian can read. Dad's great mate, David Horgan, has also been a massive part of getting this book onto the shelves. David, we can't thank you enough. Paul, Warren, Zorba, David W, Robin, Ben, Sarah, Mick, Terry, thank you for your work on this project also. I'm sorry if I've missed anyone. Of course, many others have played a part in making Dad's book a reality, especially Dad's confidants, especially Paddy Muggovan, collaborators and thesis supervisors. We thank you all, too many to name, of course, for your selflessness and commitment. Somehow it seems fitting that as I've been thinking about what to say today, I've been out on the APY lands. Just last Friday, I paid a visit to the place where it all began for Mum and Dad, Unabella, or otherwise known as Pukaja. Dad writes in his book about Pukaja and our time there in the 80s, in particular about his friendship with Gordon Inkajee. It's a great chapter and alone worth buying the book for. While I was there, I spent some all too brief time with senior Jilpi Pepai Jungala. While we lived in Unabella, Pepai worked as a policeman. I was thrilled to see him, at first not recognising him, given the years that have passed. It's true to say that our family has a strong affection for Pepai, and my feeling is that is mutual. After greeting each other, I used my very rusty pigeon jar to catch up as best as I could on what he'd been doing, what he felt were the issues for the community, and discovered that he was now painting. Those of you who have read Dad's book will draw the link to Gordon Inkajee here. Anyway, it didn't take long before we were walking together over to the Unabella Arts Building and for Pepai to settle into working on a large canvas, already significantly advanced. It was a beautiful piece, and I let him know that I thought so. He smiled and explained it to me a bit. Now, I'm a fan of the late Sir Ken Robinson, who talked about the concept of being in your element. As he leaned forward, carefully looking for the right place to make his next mark, I realised Pepai was in his element, painting his jukupa. And it struck me that in writing first his thesis and then turning that thesis into his book, Dad was doing exactly what Pepai is doing. He was recording important knowledge so that it can guide future generations. In doing so, Dad was in his element, right up to the end. While it's for the reader to decide what they get out of Dad's knowledge, as it is recorded in this book, one thing is for sure: you can't but be inspired by the brilliance of Algera and the Aranda people. Dad's love and deep knowledge of Aranda people and culture is illuminated in these pages, and it is for all of us to benefit from. Like Laurie says in his foreword, not every reader will fully follow Dad into the depths of mystery, as Dad called it, at the heart of the book. But regardless of where we find ourselves along the natural and spiritual dimensions of Einstein's cosmic religion, it is impossible to come away from the book without an enhanced sense of wonder and optimism, and with renewed feelings of genuine humility. Now, before I finish up, I just want to make a special acknowledgement of our sister Magella. As Warren said, Magella is as brilliant as our father, and without her, this book just doesn't exist. Marg Carmody may have been the catalyst for Dad to set out to write something that she could get her head around, but without Magella, Margie would still be scratching her head. Well done on your achievement, Gel, in seeing Dad's vision through. His voice is authentically captured, and we have you to thank for that. When it's all said and done, Mike Bowden was a teacher. It was his greatest gift. Unbreakable Rock leaves his voice behind so he can continue to teach anyone who is interested. Dad's book honours Aboriginal people, and no one says it better than his Aranda friends, Therese, MK, Kathleen and Margaret, when they say his work is their echo. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you so much, Kane. And as the book launch comes to an end, we have two very important people that played a big role in opening up the pathway to the Aranda mystery. Therese Ryder, the artist, is now going to join us. She's an Aranda elder, and her cover painting, or her painting, is the cover of the book. So, Therese.
And this is a group of us from Alice Springs. Is Teresa Ryder, Margaret Heffernan, and Kathleen Wallace. and one of them is going to say a few words. Teresa, you first.
To me, it's a privilege to be here presenting myself to say a few things about Mike. I congratulate him today, even though he's not here. With the launch of his book, I am very happy that I've been involved with Mike's works for nearly over 30 years and known him as a great man, a good friend. I always said to him, Mike, you are a great man. Always know that me and my children are your Aboriginal families here. Aranda families. I'm also happy that my paintings are in your book and the cover of the book as well. And it is with my big love for all his family today and Judy. I would like to say more, but right now I'm a bit sad at a loss in the family. But to Mike's family, Sean, Kane, Red, Joe, Magellan, Patty, and Charlie, my love goes to all of you today. May God bless you all.
And Kathleen.
And I talked a little bit about how Aboriginal culture believes in. Sometimes I used to tell him stories that I knew. It came from dreaming, and he said it in the book then that he wrote. And I am really happy that he left a book for us to read.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we get in this amazing Zoom age. Warren says that we don't have MK Turner with us, so I guess it's time for me to plug the book again. If you want it, you can go directly to alalabooks.com and come to you in the mail, $40. If you want an ebook version, you can get it on Amazon. So look, it has been a wonderful event, and I want to thank all the participants. As I read the book and pondered it and listening to Pat Dodson, I remember when I first met Teilhard de Chardin via a book of his called Le Milieu Divin, The Divine Milieu, and it's just amazing the insight that truth is of a piece, and all who seek truth, wherever and whoever they are, truth seeks them as well. The Jesuit spirituality in Latin is nulla est profana, which is precisely the insight of the Aranda people, of the ultra, the mystery. Nothing is profane. All is sacred. And that was terrific, and it came through too that any genuine human experience, whether it be in the big cities or in the magnificence of the Australian outback, truth and mystery are there. to be shared. So thank you all, and the book is now duly launched, and we'll now segue through to a discussion. We thank those who have joined us. If anyone needs to leave, well, that's fine. So thank you very much, Pat. Thank you, Warren. And just thank you. Okay, so we'll now move into our forum, and the first participant is Magella Bowden, the only daughter, and she's an editor and a linguist, and she joins us from Darwin.
What I wanted to talk about today is something that Dad was really passionate about, and something that will surely stir conflicting responses. This is something that Dad did a lot and didn't shy away from, and although I feel like I don't want to stir anything up, I know that this is what he would do. So I want to talk about the social imaginary, which is something that he was passionate about. And his thesis was titled Searching Algera to Reveal the Cosmic Christ, a contribution to the dialogue between the ancient Aranda imaginary and Christianity. I want to tell you first a little bit about our relationship, me and Dad, and how we came to this point of writing this book, together. In the book, he talks about looking after my little son Levi and Mum at the same time, and starting his PhD. It was actually when I stopped working and was on maternity leave, and then home with my new baby, and Dad was home with Mum, and we were caring and living in this, extended family together, that the two of us began to really delve into some deep ideas. Every day we would spend, in the backyard over coffee, watching the kids, bringing back to the conversation things that we'd experienced, things we'd talked to other people about, our interactions, our readings. And this relationship began around his PhD. We then moved to Darwin after his diagnosis, and when he finished his PhD, I started my master's. And at this point, Dad was starting to lose his ability to talk. And so it was over my master's that we were able to continue to communicate with, chapters that I would send to him, and he would write back his comments and do his track changes, and the conversation, the dialogue continued to the point where Dad couldn't talk at all anymore. And we had reached such a point of consensus in our own minds that we knew what each other was thinking. So when it came time to writing the book, it was almost like we were in one mind. In saying that, we argued a lot. And one of the things that we argued about was this word imaginary that he used for years. He would use it with such, exuberance. It was this magical word that uncovered so much. And I would say, no, stop using that word. It's misleading. It makes people think the wrong thing. I know that you have a particular meaning for this word, but most people don't, and it's confusing. So it wasn't until not long before he went into palliative care that he'd be really struggling at night time, particularly with his throat. All of the neurons were breaking down, and it was affecting his mouth and his throat. And we were often very worried about him overnight. And I got a message one morning that said, I nearly died last night. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. And I said, what happened? I texted him, what happened? And he wrote back and he said, Kathleen said that she won't support my book if I use the word imaginary. And I was like, yes, finally somebody with enough power to change your mind. And he said, I'm going to have to take it out of the book. I'm going to have to remove it. I can't have it in there. I need to have the stained glass window. I need Kathleen's support in this. And I believe that Kathleen was right, that it was not right to put the word imaginary into Unbreakable Rock. I think that word can be dangerous and it can be misleading when it's in the wrong minds, and it could be used to undermine our Jeddah. I just wanted to read to you, just out of the book, how Dad explained the use of this word. He says, Al Jeddah, the focus of the book, is not a fanciful invention conjured out of the imagination, but rather a collective vision of reality, grounded in a people's experience of life as a social group, and summarises their goals and aspirations. Canadian scholar Charles Taylor describes this as the ways people imagine their social existence, how they fit together with others, how things go on between them and their fellows, the expectations that are normally met, and the deeper normative notions and images that underlie their expectations. A social worldview is understood as the product of a deep and considered thought over a sustained period. It is a social rather than a personal construct. And you can read more about that in the book when you buy it. So, but what I wanted to say was that I was very supportive of, Kathleen in that moment, and I worked with Dad to help to, find a substitute for the word, because he used it quite a lot, and we changed it to worldview most of the time. And it was funny though, because after he died, suddenly I was left with the book and I had to finish it. And I was doing all this editing and I was realizing that there was something missing. There was something that worldview didn't capture, and that it needed something a little bit more. And so I had a little bit of a searching of my own and a journey of my own in trying to understand what this word imaginary might mean. And I realized that it really is a powerful word, and that it might be one of the tools that we can use to look into what is mystery. Mystery is the unknown, and imagination is the way that we access mystery. So we use imagination when we look into the future. The future is, we do not know. We can only imagine what the future will be. We also use our imagination to picture what was, to look into the past, and, particularly in Central Australia, we imagine the footprints of the ancestors. We imagine those who have been before and the lives they lived. And we see the evidence of that written in the landscape. So on both sides, we have the use of this, this mental tool. It's really a spiritual tool to look into what was and what will be. Something that really hit home for me was when Nicole, who's here with us, showed me the painting that's in the book now of Honeymoon Gap that Mum and Dad had given to her for her wedding, which had taken place in Honeymoon Gap, a really special place in Alice Springs. And when I saw the painting that had been done by Therese all those years ago, I was immediately struck by how the trees in the riverbed were all young trees, the way that she had painted it. But that if you go to that place now, all the trees there are very old and gnarled and ancient looking trees. And I rang Therese and we talked about it, and I said, it's almost like you're painting that place 100 years ago when those trees were young, or it could be 1,000 years ago. It is a picture of a timeless place, that she didn't go down there and draw a picture of what was in front of her. She imagined the landscape as it was and could be, And so I thought that was a really powerful use of imagination in seeing country and seeing what is there. Another way of understanding it that David Woods actually suggested to me was about how each one of us might imagine our heart beating inside of our chest. Now, we know our heart is there. We know it's beating. We know there's blood pumping through our bodies. But we use our imagination to picture our heart. We can't see it, but we know it's there. And I think that that's another really beautiful metaphor of Algeta, that Algeta is real. This is what Kathleen said. Algeta is real. And it's as real as your heart beating inside your chest. And in order to know it, you visualize the ancestors, you visualize the spirit, you imagine the roots of Algeta running through and connecting all of us. And so I thought that I wanted to speak for Dad in this moment and to open this idea up because I knew how passionate he was about it. I know that people won't agree and they'll still think that it is misleading, as I think people have felt that the word dreaming is misleading, because dreaming can make you think like it's not important, it's just, made up. But it's not. Dreaming is important, and it's about how we shape our understanding of those words. It's how we change our perspective on our own English words and the importance we give to those concepts in our lives. Imagination and dreaming are two words that I think we need more of. We need to be able to dream up a future where we are connected and in relationship. We need to imagine, reimagine our world, and with a boundless imagination where we can bring the concepts of Algeta into who we are as well. This story is an invitation to draw this into ourselves. The thing that really prompted me to talk about this was that I saw the woman Cori Bush, who has just been elected as the first Black woman from Missouri in the US Congress, and she was making her acceptance speech, and she said really powerfully, our America will be led not by the small-mindedness of a powerful few, but the imagination of a mass movement that includes us all. And I felt like if Dad had heard that, he would have grabbed it and he would have said, yes, that's it. That's what we're doing here. We're trying to bring in everyone and capture everyone's imagination and the spirit of Algeta and bring that gift out in everyone. So that's my little bit of grizz coming through that I just wanted to share with you all, and I hope you can take that with you.
Okay. I'm Jeff Colvin, and I have to say greetings from across the pond. I've lived in America for the last 43 years. Prior to that, I was born and raised in Australia and spent 17 years in the Morris Brothers up to 77, and then came out here to do a PhD and couldn't afford the fare home after that, so I stayed on and worked as an adjunct professor, research associate, and so on at the University of Oregon, where I retired 10 years ago. My connection with this group, or this event, I should say, is through Michael Pera, who introduced me to Michael Bowden's book, The Unbreakable Rock, and obviously I've since read it. And today I've been prompted or asked to give a brief review of it as someone from a university, and done this before a few times. So, and very briefly, I'm just speaking for 3 minutes and feel like taken a photo of the Grand Canyon and get this wee little piece that doesn't represent it. But anyway, I'll do my best. I break a review into two sections. One is to speak to the substance of the book, and then secondly, its impact. So 3 themes in the substance. Dr. Michael Bowden's book, Unbreakable Rock, is truly a masterful work. I don't say that lightly. As I said, I've reviewed a lot of books, and it's a masterful book that describes in detail how the beliefs and practices of Indigenous people in and around Alice Springs have been meaningfully integrated with Christianity, specifically Catholicism. Second, Bowden, through his 30+ years of immersion in the local Indigenous culture and language, coupled with this struck me as amazing, his in-depth understanding of Christian scripture and theology, that enabled him to provide a unique and compelling fusion of those 2 belief systems. And the third piece, which struck me very strongly, he strongly emphasized the reciprocal benefits of this integration and enculturation to provide a refreshing and innovative approach to mission work, and also for anyone working respectfully and effectively with Indigenous populations. This book, in terms of impact, I can see it providing a rich resource in a number of areas, 3 specifically. I'd see it being used for coursework at universities and high schools for Indigenous and ethnic studies. Second, as a roadmap, as a guide for those engaged in mission work with Indigenous people, not only in Australia, but has particular relevance out here with the Native Americans or American Indians. And not, as I say, throughout the world, it's a roadmap, a beautiful roadmap, and so refreshing. And finally, for delineating effective and critical perspectives to leaders involved with planning and implementation of services to Indigenous people. In closing, I've never had the opportunity to meet Michael, but I'm reminded in scripture of a line where Jesus teaches, "By their fruits you shall know them." So today we translate fruits to say legacy. So given that, I am proud to say that I do know Michael Bowden through the legacy of the richness of his life, and in this case, his scholarly and inspiring work, Unbreakable Rock. Thank you.
We're going to zoom down to Melbourne and to John Stewart. And it says here that he's into adult education. And knowing Jack Stewart, he's into all sorts of things. Are you there, John?
Good afternoon, all. This is a great honour to be able to speak to this remarkable work. My journey actually goes back with Michael back to the seminary in 1965 when he came. I was 3 years ahead of him. And I often wonder when I went to the seminary whether that was the start of my journey into mystery. And one of the lovely mysteries I did have back then was I loved playing football with Michael, not against him. One of the great things that has happened for me over the years is to be in my work now as a spiritual director. I was priest for 8 years. Then I worked in the alcohol and other drug field. And what I found when I was working in the alcohol and other drug field, there was no one who was not saved. There was a deep sense of people, even in the depth of addiction, were screaming in their addiction for peace and for harmony and for release. Sadly, when I was working in the alcohol and other drug field in the 80s, the spiritual dimension of rehab was almost non-existent. And that led me to Chicago, to the Institute for Spiritual Leadership, where I studied and did a formation program at the Institute for Spiritual Leadership as a spiritual director. And since 1990, I've been working mainly as a spiritual director, but in all sorts of different forms. I worked in the alcohol and other drug field for many years. And then I'm now part of an amazing group that is actually a formation program for people interested in spiritual direction. And I do a lot of spiritual direction myself and lead retreats. And since 62, one of the things that's really influenced my life and work have been the mystics. And it's Teilhard de Chardin's comment, "We are spiritual beings on a human journey," that captures, by and large, what the institutional church hasn't got a clue about. That it's our humanness that is the starting point for what we do. And Teilhard captures that beautifully. And it means for me, and it comes out of Michael's book, the absolute delight and honour to know what it means to be human. And Michael's exploration of Arundel life opens up for me as a white fella what it really means to be human in another way. His insights just give it a terrific dimension to Teilhard's exploration. One of the chapters in the book that has just absolutely blown me out of the water is the Cosmic Christ. It is a beautiful, beautiful chapter. If nothing else, the book is worth reading just for that chapter, because what he captures is the understanding of what mystery is all about and how the Cosmic Christ is actually part of it. Mick Lay, in his review of the book, said that everything caught up, that the Cosmic Christ was there long before white fellas even knew it. And it's a bit like the Abraham story, isn't it? When Abraham finally gets to where he's going 3,500 years ago, meets Melchizedek, and suddenly realises that God was there before he was there, and he didn't know it. Now, one of the wonderful things that comes out of this book for me is Michael's, and I'll put it in this term, there's a wonderful phrase in Celtic spirituality called anamkara, and it means soul friend. And a soul friend is that person who accompanies. And what this book does for me is show a person who is not a detached observer, but actually is immersed in people's lives, understanding very, very deeply what it means to be human. I'm certainly going to be using this book in our spiritual direction formation program, I know. I'm part of a spirituality group, a retreat group that meets 4 times a year, and this is the next book that we will be looking at when we study Indigenous affairs. And the wonderful thing that this book has done for me is actually showed how much we are one. That the Cosmic Christ, that the Arunta wisdom is just, it's so much similar, and it's that beautiful dialogue that Michael has led us on. We will ever be enriched by someone who is an anamkara. So I'd like to thank Michael deeply for this, and also listening to Magella before, what an amazing relationship and how you've been able with your family to encourage Dad to do this. Thank you very much, and let's hope that what is happening in this country and the world can find more people like Michael who can have the dialogue and be the Anam Cara. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jack. Our next contributor on the list is Robin Reynolds, who was the thesis supervisor at the Yarra Theological College Centre. There, Robin.
Hi there, everyone. Am I being heard?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thanks. I'm speaking from Melbourne, Wiradjuri country, and I just want to greet especially first the Bowden family, wherever you all are. Thank Jella especially. And also, if Arunda Mob are connecting with us now, Wuda Mora, Maggie, Mrs. Wallace, Teresa, MK, Woodsy, thank you. So just a few thoughts. In the early stages of Mike's writing, also I want to greet Joylene coming all the way, joining us now from St. Lucia. Well, and hello to everyone who's joining this important time. It's great. In the early stages of Mike's writing and research, I wrote these words to him as one of his privileged supervisors, honouring John Honour, Major Supervisor also. I wrote, Mike, parts of this thesis could be, and perhaps one day will be written in another form. It could be a bestseller for sure. Your writing is engaging, passionate, intelligent, and informed because it comes from your own wonderful life experience. Mike, I continued to write, hold on to those football and dance images. Keep your eye on the ball, as John often reminds you. And yes, the dance metaphor, remembering, and this was before the diagnosis, of course, of motor neuron. So I wrote, the dance metaphor, remembering dance doesn't exclude pause and pain and surprise. Perhaps dance was our first language. What I know, Mike, for sure, is that dance is of the spirit, as is this quest of yours. So, Mike, love to you and Jude as always. And for now, just remembering a line from Patrick Kavanagh's poem, The Great Hunger. In the crumb of bread, the mystery is. God in the bits and pieces of every day. And I'd just like to add some other words from one of Mike's thesis examiners, Dr. Roger Schroeder, SVD, who's the Professor of Intercultural Studies at the Catholic Theological College in Chicago. Roger wrote, Bowden has demonstrated expert knowledge of a substantial body of scholarship in several areas, Aranda culture and spirituality, cosmic Christology, contextual theology. He has executed original research, both by building upon what's already been done, but more importantly, offering new directions for contextual theology. And Schrader's glowing report for Mike's thesis concluded, I recommend the PhD of Michael Bowden with high distinction. And I'd just like to throw in the challenge to any of you who are game enough to get hold of the thesis itself. It's easily available through the university, it's online. So just to conclude, myself, I think Unbreakable Rock reflects the person Mike is. The book, as did Mike, invites a space for anyone, for everyone to enter. The book, as did Mike, shares the heart as well as the mind stories. And it offers, as Mike's own person and life offered and offers, a profound and sacred meeting with our Indigenous Australians, a meeting with the earth and with our own selves. And yes, as Mike would say, with sacred mystery. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to say those few words.
And now we go to Hamilton in Victoria, to Pat Muggervan.
Yes, greetings, folks. Paddy Muggervan. I'm in Gunditjmara territory down in Warrnambool at the moment. Hamilton's my parish. I was privileged to get tied up with the Bowden story way back in 1979 in Mildura, and all the little kids, and a number of the kids weren't there at that stage, but Michael and Judy became my dearest friends, and I've been so honoured to be privileged to be such a part of the family over these 40 or more years, and part of many family ceremonies, births, and then marriages down the line, tied up with 6 marriages in the families, and then any number of baptisms, and so many other occasions. And the little bit I'd like to share is that myself and Michael had many very, very robust discussions about church in the world, and but particularly around, you might say, sacramentality and liturgical celebrations. How do we enculturate that which is so important to us and significant to us in our liturgies? And as we know, it's very hard to do that. It's been very difficult to move the church into enculturation modes. And so many discussions with Michael and his enculturation experiences in Alice, which have been quite amazing. But we were able to make some of that happen in the family celebrations, and most especially with you, Java and Gordon, with your wedding 2 years ago. It was and described in the book, quite an extraordinary bringing together of cultural understanding and experience, and expressing that in liturgy and ritual. So the marriage and then the initiation of your children. But I won't go on, but I've just got 2 little bits I'd like to share from the book. And it's in that chapter of the Circle of Love. And Kane, thanks for your words there. And it was, Michael hadn't realised that Jed and Yasmin were going to be baptised on one of those, my visits to Victor Harbour with you. And of course, baptisms, weddings, Michael, it meant so much to him, that little speech that he would make. And he would always use Indigenous language from the Aranda or Pitjantjatjara peoples, and share a little bit of that wisdom, and he'd relate the Indigenous experience to your family experience, because that's been so much part of your family. So he heard of the baptism about to happen the next day. I began planning immediately. It had been my habit to prepare a speech for family weddings, for baptisms and funerals over the years. It was one of my great joys, a chance to speak from the heart to the family about the values and the principles that have inspired our family. I love it. The kids all know that and allow me a space to get up and give my spiel. I knew that this year would be no different. And then we turn over the page, Kane. I can see you smiling there. And it was different. He says, my turn came to speak, but I couldn't speak. And it wasn't because of his MND, which sort of didn't stop him actually, but I couldn't speak. But then, being me, I did. I was really emotional and crying while I said, I think you all know that I love to talk at these gatherings, but today I don't have anything to say. I've just become redundant. Kane has already said all that I was going to say. The baton has been passed. Jude and I have done our work. The values of our family are firmly embedded in our sons and daughters. And that's my little contribution today. Jude and I'm so conscious, as all you, the children are so conscious of Jude there in the nursing home and in her dementia. But she's been, in a sense, the silent and not so silent partner of this amazing journey of Michael. Her knowledge of and integration with and love of and relationship with the Indigenous people have been such an enormous part of this journey. And then, of course, they're both so proud of you children who have taken up the baton and are keeping alive this journey. And your little sharing there, Majella, that was so significant and so special. So, so that's just my sharing. The family really incarnates what Michael has shared and passed on to them. May they continue to do that in the extraordinary way that they are extraordinary people too.
Thank you very much, Penny. I now believe we're going to zoom to the Caribbean, or is it the Caribbean, where Jolene Harmson is. She's a historian and anthropologist. Hi, Jolene, we can see you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Just gathering my thoughts to speak, really. This is, so my name is Jolene Harmson. I'm in St. Lucia in the Caribbean. Thank you very much for having me today. I want to give a big shout out first to Robin. Sister Robin, it's so nice to see you again, Robin. I haven't seen you in 29 years. Lovely. The Aranda Elders in Alice Springs. I haven't seen MK Turner, but I recognize the other ladies. I haven't seen you in 30 years. Very nice to see the three of you there. You probably don't remember me. That's fine. Kane, Majella, I've never met you. I've never met your dad. I feel like I ought to give you my condolences. I know how hard it is to lose your parent, but I just want to congratulate you. You guys have such a wonderful family. I don't even want to say I'm jealous. That would be stupid. But my God, what a family! And I really only got to know that side of your dad finishing Unbreakable Rock today. I read the PhD thesis, and I agree with Robbie. If you're interested, you really should read that as well. It's where I got to know your dad's theological. We spoke about that and then had a very brief flurry. I'll speak about that in a minute. But I really only got to know the family side of him through Unbreakable Rock. And boy, what a family you are. Really something to be just grateful for. So congratulations on your dad, really is what I need to say. I prepared a little thing to read out today. Let me do that. So my name is Jolien. I was born and raised in the Netherlands. In 1987, when I was 20, I spent a year in Australia on a working holiday. And I was backpacking and working my way around the continent. And through a friend of a friend of a friend, I was invited at a party at somebody's house in Alice Springs. I literally knew nobody there, but I was struck by the presence of an elderly, and when I say elderly, when you're 20, everybody is old. Obviously very well respected Aboriginal lady there who was kind of holding court with several youngsters, both black and white, hanging on to her every word. She just seemed so at ease with herself. I didn't really know Aboriginal people, but I don't recall being involved in the conversation that evening at all, really. But at about 11 o'clock at night, she just came up to me and said, "Where are you staying?" Now I had pitched my tent earlier that day at some commercial campground. I think it was on the western side of Alice Springs. So we got into somebody's car. I just unhooked my, grabbed my tent and my backpack. Margaret, MK took me home. I pitched my tent in the dark in her backyard. I think it was Curryong Drive. And the following morning, as I unzipped my tent, there was a little mob of kids staring at me, and also a big pan of hot oatmeal on the stove. And MK invited me to eat. I spent a week camping in her backyard, and we just, I guess, hung out. I listened to MK speak about meeting the Pope, when he had visited Alice Springs in 1986, and she told me about a place where she had been raised by nuns, a place called Santa Teresa and Altanga. I was fascinated to see a large colorful print of Jesus with the Sacred Heart stuck on the wall, big strips of duct tape. And at the same time, sitting in her yard one afternoon, MK pointed at a distant bird in the sky above us and said, "Look, that one's my totem." Why she bothered with me, I don't know, but I never forgot. So I finished my travels, I returned to the Netherlands. I started a master's in social history at Erasmus University in Rotterdam. And in my third year, I started researching this place that MK had told me about. This is before the internet, obviously. So it took a little more work. I took a couple of courses in religious and symbolic anthropology alongside my regular fare. And I sought out a supervisor, and as it turned out, that was the Rector Magnificus at Leiden University, Professor Lou Leertouwer, who's a very well-respected theologian with a secret love for Aboriginal religion. I wrote to the Catholic parish priest, and I think the council at Santa Teresa, and I dropped MK's name, and I requested access to study the mission's history. Same thing with the Monastery of the Sacred Heart in Sydney. Again, why they really should have bothered with me, I can't say, but they welcomed me in. So from August till December, 4 months in 1991, I spent 4 months back in my beloved Australia. I studied the archives at the monastery in Sydney. I went to the library at the Institute for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies in Canberra. And I interviewed as many people as I could during my 8-week stay at Santa Teresa. So I met Sister Robin Reynolds, and I also again met up with MK in Alice Springs, where she and other middle-aged Aranda women were struggling at the time, 1999, late 80s, early 90s, to stem the tide of despondency, alcoholism, sickness, and death. It was a heartwarming but also a sobering experience, I remember. I returned home, I wrote the book, the thesis, I won the prize. It was considered the best MA in modern history in Holland that year. And after graduating in 1993, I really tried my hardest to come back to Central Australia and do a PhD comparing the changing religious identity of Western Aranda people in Hermannsburg with what I had seen with Eastern Aranda people in Charles Creek, Altanga, and Santa Teresa. It was not to be. Life grabbed me by the scruff of the neck and dumped me here in St. Lucia in the Caribbean. I graduated with a PhD in social history on the history of Beaufort, the town where I live. And I ended up running a beach cafe and a wind and kite surfing center, a real estate business. But I did also co-author the history of St. Lucia and published it. Thanks to Robbie, Sister Robin Reynolds, I never quite lost touch with the Aranda mob. She kept me informed of how MK Turner is doing. My paternal aunt, Kamara to my Parula, as she designated me, after a few moments' thought, saying that her daughters call me cousin, and MK is also the same age as my own father, who I lost in 2008. And it was Robbie who put me in touch with Mike Bowden while he was working on his PhD in 2017. To be honest, he asked me for a soft copy of my history of Santa Teresa, which I sent to him, and I clean forgot all about him afterwards. No offense, Kate. Until he contacted me again in June of last year and sent me his completed PhD, which I just devoured in 2 late-night sittings, I think. And just for a couple of weeks then, Mike and I exchanged a flurry of emails, comparing notes and teasing each other, and trying to put into words how we feel and think about Al Chara. I remember I wrote to him, "Now, Mike, I don't know how else to say this." So this is me writing to Mike. But to me, as a relative outsider, because I've been out of it for 29 years, it's quite evident that Al Chara really is bigger than Catholicism or even Christianity as a whole. Bigger as in more encompassing, more visceral, far more tolerant of analogous, as in not strictly binary logical concepts. At heart, it is deeply, deeply humanist and accepting, not judgmental or vengeful or condemning of heretics, not jealous of territory or material possessions, and not evangelical either. In Altera, charity is not an effort, a denial of self, but a reflex. The other's pain is one's own pain. Actually, since then, I came across Bishop Desmond Tutu speaking about the African idea of Ubuntu. And here in the Caribbean, we have this idea that Bob Marley, I guess everybody knows, this idea of one love. To me, that is very similar to Altera, or the same thing really. In Altera, charity is not an effort. It is a living faith, a lived-in faith, a faith expressed in living, loving action. Since all of creation is part of it, whether or not you believe in Altera, it doesn't matter, you're it either way. The idea of converting someone to Altera would be ridiculous. It would be like converting someone to life, converting them into believing that they were created, that they exist, that in life, inevitably, you will act for better or for worse, and that as living creatures, you will eventually die and your spirit return. That is why, to me, there really is no need for surprise. And I'm quoting Mike, his last paragraph, the last paragraph in his PhD thesis, where he says, and in a manner beyond even the best of charity known to Christians, despite invasion, dispossession, marginalization, impoverishment, incarceration, and the sad dismissal of their gifts by white Australia, they being the Aranda, they continue to offer this richness to anyone and everyone who walks up to their open front door. That was Mike, and I'm telling him I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised about that. I told him I'm not sure how Altera Catholicism will develop. I'm not sure if the church is sufficiently humble to see it as an example of living faith without wanting to theorize it to death or fit it into a theological straitjacket. Maybe the reverse will happen. If MK and company are successful in saving the ship and the younger generation continues to help heal their community from the trauma of spiritual loss, emotional despair, and physical and psychological violence, Altera might just sail on and set its own course, with Catholic patches on its sails and hull, and welcome anyone who wants to join on board for the ride. I'll come. The last time I heard from Mike, in July of last year, he was struggling to transform his thesis into a book. I suggested at the time that he would just try and distill the essence of the thesis into a book and call it Altera Catholicism, the short and sweet of it. So he didn't take my advice on the title, and actually the book is a hell of a lot better than anything I could have envisaged, and far more encompassing of his life as well as his thesis. I never heard from him again, but boy, did he transform his life's passion into a book. So all I can say is hats off, Mr. Bowden, well done. And I shake your hand through the veils of mystery. Godspeed. Thank you. And thank you for having me.
I'll now zoom to Geelong in Victoria to Mick Lee, an academic, a friend and a reviewer, and an old mate of mine. Hello, Michael.
Thanks, Bond. Look, my time in Werribee was the same as Jack Stewart's, so our time with Mick Bowden overlapped by that year, 1965, in the middle of which I went off to Rome. But we've kept in contact, thank God, sporadically since then. And unlike me, Mick left the seminary in order to learn some theology. I went to Rome to learn mine, and leave other people to judge who chose the better course. I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land that I'm on, the Wadawurrung people, but I'd also like to pay my respects to the Aranda people, particularly those elders who contributed so much to Mike's book. It's not only Mike who owes them a debt, it's the readers of the book as well. And hopefully there will be many more Australians who will be led into the Altiera, the life world, the social imaginary of the Arrernte people and other Aboriginal peoples in this country as a result of Mick's example. I'm also a devotee of Charles Taylor. The concept of a social imaginary, I think, is a very powerful one. It both sets the limits to what we can think and believe and the behaviours we base upon those things, but it also acknowledged that if it's healthily understood, it also acknowledges that those boundaries are porous and can be transcended. Now, I think the great contribution that Mick has made with his research is to be willing to transcend the boundaries of the social imaginary that he was brought up in, that the Christian church, particularly the Catholic Church in Australia, was brought up in and bound by, in order to enter into what I described as a genuine communion with the holders of El Tierra. You can dip into other life worlds, other theoretical systems in an academic way by simply defining the concepts and seeing how they hang together. But you can't understand what they mean to other people unless you're prepared to enter into communion with those who hold them, those who govern their lives based on them. Now, to my mind, the history of colonisation in this country and elsewhere has been a history of the failure of the colonisers to enter into the Altjera of the peoples with whom they came in contact. Now, it is a difficult thing to do. It means that you've got to constantly question the boundaries of your life world. You've got to think beyond the square. That's what. But what you were doing, and this is the value of Taylor's concept, it seems to me, in doing that, is that you are redefining the boundaries of the social imaginary. You are using your imagination as it has to be used in any fertile field of academic endeavour to transcend the limits of the existing imaginaries. And Mick has blazed a trail here, so it seems to me, along which he encountered a number of blockages from institutional religions, particularly a certain bishop. On the other side of that coin, however, he does pay tribute, and I join him in paying tribute to the efforts of some of those whom he did encounter on that journey, who were missionaries of the Sacred Heart or from other orders, who had made similar efforts to his own to enter into communion with the Altjera of the oldest living civilization on the globe. Now, if Mike Bowden needed or was seeking a monument, and I'm sure he wasn't, what more worthy monument could he have than to have been able to enter into a communion with the Altjera of the oldest living civilization on Earth. Now, I think that I've been part of the reconciliation movement in this country since, well, my first efforts at it go back to when I was at school, I think. But the reconciliation movement, I think, is gradually coming to the recognition that that every policy that is being dreamed up as a means of harmonising the relationships, integrating Indigenous Australia with colonial Australia has turned out in the long run to be another effort on the part of those in power, the white fellas, to impose some other framework from their social imaginary onto black fellas. And none of them have worked. And so if we are ultimately to succeed in the reconciliation movement in this country, we have to follow the trail that Mike and others like him have blazed in entering into a communion with the Altiera of the Aboriginal peoples of this country. It's been a privilege to walk behind Mick in his journey on this PhD thesis and its conversion to a book. I still remember some of the bruises he left me with as I left for Rome in 1965 from the football field. Great memories, both of them.
To Schneider, school principal in Melbourne.
Good, thank you very much, Paul. Well, like so many before me, I didn't have the opportunity to meet Michael Bowden, but was introduced to his work by Michael Pera, and I'm very grateful, Michael, for that opportunity. Indeed, while Michael Bowden was covering himself in glory with his beloved Tigers, alongside Michael Green and Kevin Bartlett and Barry Richardson down there at fullback, I was beginning my own journey in education and was interstate on that last Saturday in September in 1969. I didn't see that grand final, but I have seen the last three. He would have been thrilled to have seen the last one, I'm sure. It was in Bunbury in Western Australia in 1969 that I began a 50-year career in education, finishing my stint in the Catholic Secondary College sector as campus principal for 13 years at Lavalla Catholic College. That end was in 2006. After that, I joined the academic staff of Monash University and eventually retired in 2019 following the completion of a PhD in child and adolescent developmental psychology. I read Dr. Bowden's Unbreakable Rock and realized that he and I had maybe just a little bit in common. He was also a teacher. My reading of his years of teaching at the Catholic High School Ganchala unit at Alice Springs is that he wanted to make education culturally appropriate, to continue to nurture and to infuse in young Indigenous people the culture encased in the Aranda language, so that the richness of that culture might not be lost. He understood that language and ritual and ceremony, relationships, and the core value of the consideration of the role of kin, separation by gender or age, and leadership are the values where power resides within any given culture. Along with Veronica Dodson, he constantly sought ways to creatively introduce the richness of the Aranda language into the curriculum, and found ways to assist significantly disadvantaged students to feel that they had a legitimate place in their classrooms. He began by teaching his students how to read and write in Aranda. He took them on excursions, and at one point, Veronica Dobson stopped on the side of the road and led them to, my apologies for the pronunciation, to Atwayaki, a wild orange tree out in the middle of nowhere. Michael marveled at how she knew exactly where to find it. He introduced other Aranda adults into the classroom in, for example, an art project with women like Agnes Palmer, who's now sadly deceased. She was instrumental in introducing the concept of Alchera to her students, explaining the use of the circle in her artwork. God is like a circle, she would say. And interestingly, Therese Ryder says Alchere, and she's another great artist. She says Alchere is like a circle. Much more could be said about Michael Bowden, teacher and educational leader, and his book is so much more than a few references to his teaching career. And much has already been said about Altera Catholicism, about Altera Trinity encompassing giver, gift and giving, the cosmic Christ, the importance of place, and above all, the experience of Altera mystery. So no more from me. However, only to say that I did enjoy reading Unbreakable Rock, with one bookmark in the glossary section, lest I was not able to follow the meaning and pronunciation of the Aranda words used.
Hang on, Peter, if you can hear it. We can't hear you. Well, look, thank you very much for that contribution. Maybe it's time to move on to Professor Laurie Maloney, who helped edit the book, played a big part in helping get the book out. And he's also in COVID-free Melbourne.
Thanks very much, Paul. I'm talking to you from the heart of Tigerland and also, of course, Wurundjeri country. Like Jack and Jack Stewart, Michael Lay, I'd like to start in 1965 when 28 young men fronted up at Corpus Christi College to begin their journey towards the Catholic priesthood. In the years that followed, we get to know each other pretty well. But I quickly became aware of a gentle, muscle-bound bloke amongst us and of his huge generosity of spirit. I remember when I did well in a philosophy exam in our second year, Michael sought me out to congratulate me. He was that sort of guy who just genuinely rejoiced in the achievements of others. And I was sad that he didn't return at the beginning of our third year. He would have made a fantastic priest. But I also know that celibacy and the priesthood would just never have contained him. So skip to 1975, we're at Morning Star, the old Franciscan seminary, the first of a number of reunions of the year of 65. And again, my memories of Michael are of a young man who continues to be a picture of generosity and this energetic kind of optimism that surrounded him. 1981, it's a wet afternoon, we're back at Werribee, and we're gathered to mourn the loss of a yearmate, Peter Hart. When Peter left the seminary, the only work he could get after years of study was a labouring job. It was a common thing in those days. On a Friday evening before the start of a long weekend, Peter and his mates are rushing to finish a job, and a heavy object overbalances and kills Peter, who's working one floor below. Michael seeks me out. "How's life, Mole? You're jumping out of your skin?" Typical, I think. That stage I wasn't jumping anywhere, but I couldn't tell Michael. But something of his sheer enthusiasm, that continued enthusiasm, rubs off on me. And in a good way, Michael gives me a kick in the pants. This is back in 81. 1995, I'm teaching in Alice Springs. I'm working with Indigenous students. I've really got not much idea of what I'm doing. I find a number for Michael and I call him, and we talk of old times. And Michael tells me he hasn't thought of Werribee much for a long time, but the connection between us is instant. And for all that narrowness of the Werribee curriculum that some of us here know much about, something special happened between all of us on those windy plains down just outside of Melbourne. 2016, and it's another 1965 reunion at Jack Ward's place at Yarra Valley. And I get just a glimpse of the profound development that's taken place in Michael. We go for long walks, and Michael's playing with the idea that propelled him into the exploration of Altera. I've been an atheist for years and I'm not too engaged by the Catholic stuff, but I'm starting to get a glimpse through Michael's eyes of an Indigenous worldview that I wish I knew more about. 2018, we're back at Yarra Valley. Michael's been diagnosed with MND, and I've heard his voice has changed and I'm a bit anxious about meeting him again. But Michael, in his true fashion, puts me at ease immediately. He's talking of Teilhard de Chardin and the cosmic Christ and Indigenous spirituality. And I'm intrigued and a bit skeptical. Part of me would love to emulate Teilhard. Part of me thinks, was this guy just a lunatic? I don't know. We say our goodbyes and I'm feeling a bit unsettled. 2019, I'm in Darwin and I'm keen for Michael to meet my wife Banu, who's been working with Indigenous students for the past 10 years. So we meet up at the Roma bar. We're joined by Costo. Michael has physically deteriorated, but he's insisted on driving himself to the Roma bar. Magella turns up. She's not impressed that Michael has driven himself, but I'm sure she knows her dad will play on with all that's in him right up till that final siren. And Michael again say our goodbyes. That stage, I've got no idea that Michael Pera is soon to draw me into a final relationship with Mick, as for months I pore over the wonderful words that he's written. So I'm pleased to say, despite the exhortations we've had from two of our previous speakers, that Michael's words have now escaped the constraints of a PhD thesis, because I know as an academic that practically nobody would ever read them. I really hope these words now spread out throughout the length and breadth of this land that Michael loved. And I feel good that I had a small part in tidying up a few of the rough edges. Thanks.
And now Helen Stewart. And the only note I have about Helen is mission studies. So come in, Helen, from wherever you are.
I come from Melbourne. My name's Helen Stewart, and I'm a chair of the editorial board of the Australian Journal of Mission Studies. I first met Michael at Whitley College in 2015. He was there for a conference titled Reimagining Home. I found Michael to be a very gentle, humble man, very enthusiastic about what was going on at the conference. My next time that I met Michael was at the Australian Association of Mission Studies, AGM, and he was there to vote, and I became the president of the Australian Association of Mission Studies. I'm also a chair of the editorial board of the Australian Journal of Mission Studies, and Sister Robin Reynolds is a member of the editorial board. And Robin often spoke about Michael, and she spoke about his work. And we, as an editorial board, heard a great deal about how Michael was going in putting his PhD together. About a month ago, I phoned Mike Pera, and I spoke to him at length about the thought of us in Melbourne putting together another book launch, because we believe that Michael's book, Unbreakable Rock, is a significant work. It's groundbreaking work. And we hope as an editorial board that we are going to be able to promote this work as widely as possible. Thank you.
Frank Dunham, Richmond Football Club, 6 years. Go the Tigers.
Thank you, Paul. I feel like an imposter here because I've only spoken to Michael. I've never physically shook his hand. However, I am representing my eldest son, Sean, who is very familiar with the family, has visited the Bowdens in their various locations from Mildura right through to Darwin. And I was drawn into this grouping because of my football links. It was amazing when the information came from Michael Pera, the number of people I've been associated with. Paddy Dodson, I coached. Warren Snowden, he grew up in the same suburb I lived in Canberra. His father and I were selectors at the Manuka Football Club together. Kane Bowden, he and I both have coached Melbourne University Blacks. And then today I hear from Robin the name of John Honor. He was one of my people I coached at ANU, like with Paddy Dodson. And it goes on. It was incredible. However, let me tell you about my talk with Michael. I think it is significant as I hear what people are saying about his book and his insights. And so in Darwin about 10 years ago, I rang him up. He wasn't feeling terribly well, but nonetheless, he was enthusiastic to hear, A, what a former Tiger was doing in the top end and what my professional interests were. They were in physical ecology. And I told him about the interest I had in mulga groves, how they developed, how they use water, and they manage water for their drought tolerance. I also added that this work was first revealed by Australia's first chief scientist, Ralph Slatcher, when he was working in Central Australia. And that information was then picked up by Professor Evanari from Israel. He took it to the Negev desert and made the desert bloom and got worldwide attention for plagiarising Ralph Slatcher's work. Mike thought this was wonderful information and applauded my efforts in bringing it to him. So here is an ex-Tiger who was a decade ahead of Mike, and they were in the dark ages, but still rejoicing in the euphoria of our most recent grand final. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Frank. And there are thousands rejoicing with you. Well, that's the end of our Zoom forum. So thank you to all the contributors, and thank you to the parent conglomerate that put this together. And also we should acknowledge the work of Jack Shaw, who did a lot to get us all together and to organise this event here at the National Press Club in Canberra. Bye.